Okay, that is going on perfect. It's recording. So this presentation is part of our Sustainable Living series, brought to you by the Land Stewards Program, Master Gardener Program, and the Jackson Soil and Water Conservation. So in addition to some of our classes that we usually have that are educational, we wanted to highlight ones that focus on sustainability, as that's a big part of what a lot of people are interested in and need to be more aware of. So how this works is we've got a presentation followed by some action items that we suggest for you all to be able to take, and kind of leading you into taking what this presentation is about and how you can apply that to your lives. We do have a QR code at the bottom of this screen, and this will be shown later on, where you can view these action lists for all of our Sustainable Living series presentations, as well as recordings for the presentations that we're able to record for. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and let our presenters, Kathryn Prive and Tuula Rebhahn from the Understory Initiative, take it away.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, we should be full screen at this point. Yeah, welcome. We're really excited. I think this might be...
I see your desktop, not the presentation.
Oh, bummer.
One
Let me try
second.
that again.
Oh, you did. Maybe that one.
How's that?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, good.
Okay.
We did it right. Great. Yeah, well, thanks everybody for being here. There's quite a number of folks here. We're really excited to share what we know and answer as many questions as possible. I think there will be a good chunk of time at the end to do questions. So I was going to introduce myself, Tuula's going to introduce herself, and then we're going to get rolling. So my name is Kathryn Prive. I am one of the founding members of the Rogue Native Plant Partnership, which started in 2018. And that group really is just a collection of other outfits and organizations and individuals and growers in the Rogue Valley who care about native plant materials, native seed, native plugs, and sort of having those resources available. I like to think of native plants as sort of the currency of restoration, and it makes all of the work flow, and you need it to be able to do pretty much everything. So there's a lot of common interest in managing native plants and having a working, reliable economy in Southwest Oregon. And as I developed the Rogue Native Plant Partnership, it became clear that one of the things that was missing in this region was an organization who had the capacity to focus on all the different parts of restoring meadows in particular, or understory habitats. And so that's how the Understory Initiative was born. I also founded that one and started as a nonprofit, and started to grow our staff and get grant dollars and to really work towards sort of bolstering up the capacity to do restoration in those grassland type ecosystems and oak savannas. Not so much forests, not so much some of the other like riparian areas, but really focusing on meadows and oak ecosystems. And then Tuula, tell me about yourself. Tell us.
Thank you. I'm Tuula Rebhahn, and I've lived in the Rogue Valley for about 10, 11 years, and I'm a lifelong Oregonian pretty much. I grew up on the Southern Oregon coast, and I came into the Rogue Native Plant Partnership and the Understory Initiative about 4 years ago. And my focus is really on the native seeds, native plant material supply chain, and fostering the whole. I like to think of myself as like kind of a community organizer for plants. So my goal is to have everyone in the region be as passionate and excited about native plants as we are, and to have those growing in all kinds of places, from tiny gardens to large landscapes. I have the privilege of living here in the Table Rocks area, so North Rogue Valley, and bought a property here a couple years ago. And my husband and I are working on kind of restoring it and all of the questions and challenges that come along with that. You know, as an ecologist, or as from an ecologist perspective, I would want it just to be all native plants and bunch grasses and, you know, look dry and caked in September and be lush and beautiful in the spring. And then there's the practical side of me that wants a lawn and, you know, more fun spaces and more ornamental plants. So, and garden, of course, for vegetables. So all these competing interests and factors have got me thinking a lot about what does it mean to do native plant restorations on a smaller landowner scale, and what's our responsibility? What do we need to do for everybody to kind of coexist and to balance habitat with human priorities? So that's kind of my obsession right now. And I'm interested to hear from you all at the end what your challenges are with your garden. So be sure to think about those questions, write them down as we go, and pop them into the chat as you think of them. So I'll let Kathryn introduce Understory in our presentation, and then I'll come back on to talk a little bit more about plants.
Yeah, so I sort of want to introduce the Understory Initiative. That's the organization that now houses the Rogue Native Plant Partnership and some of our other work. We have a staff of about 10 currently, and we are mainly ecologists. We focus on plant restoration, and where I think the way we function in the restoration space is to really leverage partnership and collaboration in order to get a very complex thing to happen, which is ecosystem restoration. If you guys want to check out our website, there's a QR code on the bottom right there, and we would love to hear from you. So find us there, and let's see. So just a quick history. I'm gonna get all my ducks up here. So the Understory Initiative and the Rogue Native Plant Partnership haven't been around forever, relatively new, but basically in 2015 and through 2017, there were multiple issues around native plant material supply. There was a need for work on pollinator issues, and there wasn't really anybody sort of organizing folks to do it. And so I was a grad student, was at the right meeting at the right time, and got asked to coordinate some of the other agencies and groups that needed this service. So after doing that for a couple of years, it became really apparent that we would need actually a 501c3 nonprofit to apply for grants and to, you know, buy the infrastructure and get the staff to be able to do some of the on-the-ground work and planning that restoration requires. And then in 2019, we formed as an organization, got our first grant. We started with a sort of research and monitoring focus. We had a couple of projects. The French Flat ACEC and Monument Meadows both are BLM-owned properties, and looking at doing plant monitoring, restoration, and restoration planning, those types of things. And then in 2020 and 2021, we started to grow our scope. We started to have projects out on the coast. We have work in the Umpqua, where we also help coordinate the Umpqua Native Plant Partnership. And at that time also, we sort of merged with the Vesper Meadow Education Program. Some of you may be familiar with them. We'll talk about them later. They have a lot of really great volunteer events, and they're kind of like a place-based example of how to do restoration in a community context. And then it takes us to present, you know, about 10 staff. We have about 20 active programs and 4 focal areas, a bunch of funders, and yeah, a budget that's enough to support our staff of 10 and do a lot of work, but not to maybe solve every problem. Okay, Tuula, you have the overview slide.
All right, I am overviewing. So we're going to talk about native plants, of course, and focusing on the specific plants that are good for meadow habitats here in Southwest Oregon. I'm going to talk quite a bit about site preparation. That's one of the most important parts of putting down native seeds or planting natives is making sure that you have a really well-prepared site first. And we'll be talking about different strategies as far as what kinds of plants and what kind of plant materials you want to use. And then go a little bit into the Rogue Native Plant Partnership and other organizations that offer assistance in terms of resources to help you with your meadow restoration project or any other kind of restoration work you want to do on your land.
And extra points to anybody who can name the plant in the picture. Type it in the chat. It's currently at that stage right now. I have a couple in my yard that are popping like this and are about to flower. So yeah.
Let me see if I can pull the chat up.
Well, will.
Yes.
Oh yeah, got a couple winners. Winner.
Yeah.
Well done. Yeah, so look for those blue flowers in a couple weeks, especially if you're able to go on a walk on Table Rocks. There's quite the show.
Yes, it's gorgeous right now. So what are native plants? That's a good place to start out, right? So the way that we usually think about them are plants that have been here for a long time and were not brought in by recent humans. So evolved in place over some thousands of years, usually tens of thousands of years. They've evolved to adapt to the local climate, the local soil conditions, and a lot of other environmental factors that make them who they are. So usually in the United States, we define native plants as those that were present on the landscapes before Europeans arrived. And as I said, they have adaptations not only to where they live, but have also co-evolved with other plants and insects and animals that utilize those plants for various reasons and have lots of interdependencies and interrelationships with those plants. Slide is not going forward. There it goes. So native plants in Southwest Oregon are special. We have a very biodiverse region, and especially in terms of plant biodiversity, the Klamath and the Siskiyou areas are just world-renowned for their plant biodiversity, which can make it overwhelming to be a gardener and to get into this as a non-botanist, but try to make it simple and straightforward for you here. And there's a lot of great resources to help you out. So just a second, I need to take care of some allergy issues.
Okay, I'm gonna pop in.
Thank you.
It's that time of year. I don't get allergies. I feel very fortunate. Okay. Yeah, so anyone who's lived in the Rogue Valley for very long is familiar with our Mediterranean climate. So very dry summers and then wet winters. And so the native plants that have evolved here actually have adaptations to survive those conditions, as opposed to a lot of, the vegetable crops and things that you have to kind of really pound on the water to be able to get them to survive in these summers. A lot of these plants, they will open late fall, or they'll do their germinating in the winter. So that allows them to grow really slowly while it's cool and moist. And then as the summer heats up and there's less water, they tend to finish blooming, drop their seeds, and go dormant, even though a lot of them are perennials. You ready?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, as Kathryn said, the native plants here have a very specific growing cycle. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have a lot of interrelationships with native birds and insects that depend on native plants, and native plants in turn depend on those pollinators to produce seed. Attracting pollinators to the garden is always a benefit, and people often grow native plants just for that reason, to bring more pollinators in to pollinate their fruit and vegetable crops as well. The slow growth thing is really key. And it can be frustrating as a gardener to start out with this, little seedling that only grows maybe an inch or two in the first year, dies back, maybe grows a little bit more the next year, and takes 2 or 3 years to flower. That's not every native plant, but that can be the case, and just something that should be ready for on a emotional and physical level.
Patience.
Yes.
Patience, friends.
And then the converse of that is that these plants are long-lived. They make investments for the future. They stash their savings accounts, their root systems with lots and lots of nutrients and water for the hard times. So you especially see this in perennial bunch grasses. They can live to be decades old. They can have enormous root systems that supersede even a lot of tree species in terms of how much carbon that they're storing underground. And the bulbs as well. It's really amazing to see places that we worked on for restoration projects that have flowering bulbs such as camas, and maybe those lands were converted over to agricultural use for a long time or had been grazed by cattle. But as soon as you change the use and let things kind of go wild, the camas is able to grow big enough again to flower. And that's just because all those years it was hiding under the ground with its bulbs and waiting for a chance to grow. So that's pretty inspiring. Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, a lot of those bulbs are edible, such as camas, a lot of lomatium species, biscuit roots are also edible. And these are important as not only staple foods, but just staple cultural plants for a lot of indigenous folks who lived in this region. So when we're restoring lands, we're doing it not just for other plants and animals, but for humans too. And who knows, maybe someday we will once again rely on native plants for some of our foods.
Can I make one point about the climate thing?
Yeah.
So I did notice a question in the chat about fire resiliency. And one thing that's pretty cool about native plants is they actually have evolved with the fire cycles that used to be here before sort of Western invasion, as you might say. So a lot of the bunch grasses, for example, like they remain green pretty late into the fall. And then when they do burn, they burn a little bit lower severity. They don't make all this sort of material that's going to fly and catch trees. So they are, yeah, they've developed to burn in a more sustainable and less scary way. Whereas a lot of the grasses that have been brought here that are not native, either annuals or pasture grasses, if they're dry, they burn hot, they burn fast, and it isn't sometimes a pretty picture as we've seen in the past. So that's a really nice thing about native plants, is that they have those adaptations to fire, and that means that there's more severity. Okay, didn't mean to bug in.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Fire's a good one. We're getting into that part of the year.
Yeah.
Gotta think about it. Sorry for the reminder.
Okay, so I just wanted to pop through some really beautiful photos of native plants to get you inspired here. Say it's Amzinkia, Plagiobothrus, popcorn flower, Wyathia or compass flower, Mulesy is another name for that one. It's in the sunflower family, as you probably guessed. Beautiful snowberry in the winter. Some big leaf maples, forest that's up in Wagner Creek, I believe. Native aster, those are really wonderful late flowering, and of course Oregon great mahonia, which is already in a lot of landscaping applications, but it's one native plant that people are familiar with and also looks great. So I wanted to talk quickly about native plants and restoration. We've been talking about this a lot, and maybe some of you are here because you want to take out your front lawn and replace it with a meadow, or maybe some of you are thinking more landscape scale and wanting to restore habitat, and just kind of wanted to dig into what the values and the meanings are of all those terms and ideas. So usually when we talk about habitat restoration, it's this definition of causing ecosystem recovery. So something happened to disturb that ecosystem, whether it was wildfire, just to keep on that theme, or even a lack of fire. So lack of traditional land management has caused a lot of disturbance in native habitats in this region. So something happened, and we're going to tip the scales back toward the processes and the plants that make the ecosystem function at its best degree. And when I say processes, those are things like fire, flood, but also just animals like beaver, for example, are important ecosystem process initiator. And there's also a term of remediation that gets thrown around, and that's more specifically about removing a substance from the soil or water. For example, here in my backyard in Central Point, I unfortunately have a lot of microplastics and garbage that were left behind from previous owners. So not only am I doing native plant restoration, but I'm also doing a lot of remediation when I'm out there, just picking through, pulling all that trash out of the ground.
Sometimes people use mushrooms for remediation to get
Yeah.
like toxins out of the soil or different tissues. But yeah, definitely more about removing yucky stuff.
Yeah, we hear about that a lot with like mine sites, for example. There's
Right.
another good one. Some plants are excellent at pulling toxic substances out of the soil. So maybe even that situation, you might not even be using native plants. You might just be using whatever plant is going to do the job of getting the toxic substance out.
And then probably in a lot of cases, restoration would ideally follow that, you know, if you're gonna, if that was your goal.
Yeah,
But it doesn't always have to. They're different and separate, but you could do one after the other.
yeah. And then I was listening to a podcast earlier about gardening, and they were talking about rewilding, and I always forget about that term, and it's such a beautiful one, and that makes me think of forests and meadows and natural spaces, and the idea that we can have those in our garden is really exciting to me anyway. And the thing that piqued my interest about it was that they were talking about having natural processes return to the landscape, so pretty similar to habitat restoration, but maybe also in the present or in the absence of using native plants could also just mean, you know, a weed lot or a place that has just kind of been allowed to go to seed, as they say. So we have to be a little bit more intentional when we're using rewilding if we want to actually have those habitats have the best possible impact on native plants and animals and all the entire community.
Yeah, and I don't know with rewilding, it strikes me that indicates like almost a lack of human participation.
Mm-hmm.
But with restoration, you know, a lot of the ecosystems that we live in down here were managed very thoughtfully by indigenous people. And so in order to restore to those conditions, it's important to think of that in terms of the human communities that manage them.
Mhm.
Rewilding, I don't know, I think you'd have to specify what you meant when you're talking about that. Because it might, I think in my understanding, a lot of times it's like, let it be, like don't don't mess with it, which, you know, that's maybe not necessarily the same as restoration.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when we talk about, you know, how native plants evolved, they co-evolved with humans too. And I forgot to mention the photo that this is up at Vesper Meadow, and we were up there doing some thatch burning. So the Vesper Meadow situation is that it was used for a long time as a place for cattle to graze, and a lot of non-native pasture grasses were brought in. And removing those is the biggest challenge to restoration there. So in this example, we tarped the area, which Kathryn's going to tell you a lot more about tarping and all the restoration techniques, but we were able to apply a little fire there to help accelerate the removal of thatch. So it's just one example of process-based restoration. So yeah, it's up to you. What are your garden goals, and how far do you want to go down the restoration path? Something to consider before you start your project. Another thing that we always struggle with when we're doing restoration projects is, you know, what are we trying to restore? It's always hard to tell actually what is out there or what should be out there. There's not a lot of really intact meadows in the valley floor in the Rogue Basin that have all their native plant communities. So we have to look really hard and think really hard about what plants should be there. And it also always depends on a lot of factors like soil types and hydrology. Yeah, and what's realistic for you. Like I was talking about earlier, you know, I want my raised bed garden and I want my bee pollinator patch, and you can have both if you have space, but you might have to be creative and stacking functions, as I say in permaculture. And it's okay to have a lawn. And it's okay to have some ornamental plants, just, you know, to have flowers in February or whatever your needs are as a human being. And I also love dogs, and so I'll never give up that lawn because we like to play out on it. And then I also just wanted to star that, you know, in some cases, fire is the best method, and in some cases, rewilding is actually a great method, and in other cases, you might be looking at a whole different set of tools in your toolbox. So I wish I could just say that there's like an easy bullet or a easy.
The ecologist's favorite
Yeah,
word is it depends.
it depends.
It depends. Well, that's a phrase, I guess, but yeah, you get the picture.
Yeah.
It depends.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about meadows. So on the left, obviously, we're kind of showing maybe something that we all see too much of. And actually, there's an interesting history of lawns as just being this thing that royalty had in Europe, that everyone in the world started to copy because it seemed like they were wealthy if they had a really big grassy spot in front of their castle or whatever. But to me, when I look at that lawn and then I look at the meadow to the right, I'm like, I want to be in the meadow. That looks like where the abundance is. That looks like where life is happening. So yeah, our interest is to really lean towards that abundance. But it's not super easy when, especially when you're starting with a situation where all you have is pasture grass or lawn or some kind of really simplified ecosystem or yard. So we need to take a look at the current conditions. Is it open? Lots of sun? Do you have oak trees? Is there shade? Do you have, riparian habitats? What is the type of place that you're looking to do work? Thinking about the soil, is it clayey or loamy? Does it pool water in the winter? Does it dry out and crack? Thinking about how much water you get if it's an area water collects or if water, it's going to be really dry in the summer. And then you can also look at the existing plant community. And if you're not a botanist, which I don't expect you to be, there's a lot of really great tools out there to help you figure out which plants you have. You can use Google Lens, you can use iNaturalist, talking to friends. There's a lot of like Facebook groups about plant identification. So there are certainly ways to figure out what you have, and that's usually a really good indicator. You can figure out, okay, I have pretty much all wetland species or that they're associated with wetlands, so I probably have a pretty wet site. Creating a species list of the natives that you already have, if any, is really important. That'll kind of help you figure out which type of plant community you're in. And like Tuula said earlier, we have so much diversity in Southwest Oregon. Even the north side of a slope versus the south side of a slope can have an entirely different plant community. So it does get pretty granular and it depends. So you want to look at what species are currently present and if you could augment that, and then could be present based on reference sites. And this is probably where it'd be a good idea to reach out to people like us to help wrap your mind around what might be there that's appropriate but isn't currently there. So after assessing the ecological conditions, the next part, dun dun dun, is to control the non-native vegetation and open ground. So there's lots of ways you can go about this. None of them are perfect. None of them are particularly easy. A lot of times you have to do multiple different things in a row, in succession for a long time. And if you think about the word invasive, like that is saying that it comes into somewhere and it takes over. And so you need to reset that trajectory and open up space for the more slowly growing, they're not as focused on growing quickly. They're focused on sticking around for a long time. And so it's a different strategy. So you really need to open up space for that in whatever work you're doing. So you can do mechanical and manual. That would look like tilling, pulling weeds, mowing, things like that. Controlled burning. If you have a larger property, that could be helpful. but in our experience, you have to do it for multiple years, maybe not in a row, but every couple of years for a while in order to really notice a difference. The first time you burn, a lot of times it's the weeds that really enjoy it. And so it takes a little bit longer to get the right kind of impacts from just burning alone. We also use a technique of smothering or solarizing, and that's just preventing the plants from accessing light. Or the solarizing is kind of cooking them in an oven underneath, plastic tarp. And then we sort of see herbicide as a last resort. I think that it's a tool that sometimes is the only way you're going to be able to get to any kind of restored state where the natives can have a chance to continue and persist. I like to use herbicide as a last resort, and especially, try to focus it on situations where if we do this treatment once, it kind of resets the system and allows for it to be possible to use all those other types of, strategies. So if you do an herbicide application and you really knock back the weeds, then you can go back, you can do your controlled burning, you can do your mechanical hand pulling, you can sort of get a handle on it, but it's like getting that, getting things at least a little bit in your favor. So if you're working for a larger area, this is kind of a process we recommend. This is just out at the Vesper Meadow Preserve. This is just sort of a pasture grass meadow. There are a few natives in here, but it's mostly dominated by weedy pasture grass.
I saw a question in the chat come up. So
yeah, go ahead.
What if there are natives in your lawn or your area that you want to restore? Are you just going to go through and annihilate all the plants?
No, I think you can, all these approaches, and I think the ones that work best are, there aren't things that you just like do without, it's not like you close your eyes and just like mow crap down. Like if you're tilling, like you could find, the handful of native plants. What I've done is like dug them up ahead of time and put them off to the side. Or, wait till they're dormant in the winter or fall, dig them up, set them aside in a safe place, then treat your site and then put them back, collect the seeds from those plants if they're annuals. And then there's some like the bulbs where even like a lot of these processes for restoration will help them and not hurt them. Mowing's a pretty safe one. I mean, even mowing down native plants a lot of times is not gonna set them back any more than anything else, but this just allows you basically to lay the tarp down and not have it be quite as billowy. These are silage tarps. They're specific to farming practices, like for small scale like vegetable production farms is mostly how I've seen them used, but they're kind of nice because they can last for up to 5 years if you take care of them. I know I'm not a big fan of just utilizing plastic, but as far as being able to treat a large area and really smother weeds, this is really effective. And it's, in my opinion, easier to manage than fire because that can be really challenging to, get the right weather, the right wind, the right permissions, safety, all those things. And then it's also not herbicide and you can reuse it. And it just takes a couple people and some sandbags. Oops. What did I do wrong?
I just need to click.
Okay, so then this is actually my farm plot outside of Ashland, where I grow native plants sort of in rows for seed production. But this area was tarped for, I want to say like 9 months, and that just killed everything. It was all, weedy grasses and star thistle and stuff. And then I tilled it. And then you can see we had a pretty good green up after that. And so if you use the the tarps successively as like the fall rains happen, a lot of the weed seeds will germinate, and then you tarp it for a few weeks, that round of them dies, and then you can effectively like flush through the weed seed bank a lot faster by using tarps and smothering them as you go. You're sort of like, I think of restoration a little bit as like peeling an onion. There's all these layers of impacts And so if you can get through a few layers of the weed seed that's sitting in the soil, that's really going to help you.
Can I add something about tilling?
Oh yeah, say your tilling.
I feel like tilling is optional and there's different schools of thought on it. So the pro is obviously that you can bring up more weed seeds to allow them to germinate and then smother them again and they'll be gone. The con is that you bring up more weed seeds. And there's, it kind of depends on the weeds and the site, but just leaving them in the soil is another technique. And if you know that you won't be tilling in the future, if you weren't planning on farming or anything like that, I think it's safe, especially if it's just a lawn that you're trying to kill. I think it's safe to not till.
Yeah, I agree. And this was for a farming application, so we were hoping to plant in rows and farm native plants for seed, and so it was a little bit more important that we had virtually no weeds. But yeah, tilling can sort of be flexible, and it's a good idea sometimes, not so much others, or maybe just have soil that's really rocky and it would be a pain in the butt to till it. So but the silage tarp, I mean, one thing that's nice about tilling is it incorporates, even after the plant material is dead, it incorporates that carbon back into the soil and it just rots a little quicker. Sometimes if you have a lot of grass, it can just be like kind of a carpet of dead grass. So that's one reason, but you could also rake it off. Yeah, and so after you've let the tarp sit for as long as a year in some cases, we typically like to add some kind of organic material, some kind of mulch, and then we put the seeds down and just sort of rake them into the top of the surface. A lot of native seeds are just designed to germinate pretty much right at the surface, so there's not really a need to dig them in super deeply. And this is my husband, Sean, and one of our previous staff members, Lilia. They're seeding into a burn pile. And so this was an area where there was a controlled burn for thinning in the Ashland watershed. And we had developed a seed mix and we were putting seeds back into that burn pile to help get some native forb diversity in the understory there. And yeah, if you do things correctly, this is what you get. These are all little camas seedlings that grow in my yard now. Now they're big plants. So I just want to touch on some of the complexities of developing a seed mix. The Rogue Native Plant Partnership, we do try to help with this as much as possible. So if you find this overwhelming, deep breaths. It's kind of mathy, but just for the folks who are curious how this works, when you're designing a seed mix, there's a lot of factors you want to take into consideration. But at the end of the day, you want a certain number of seeds going on a certain area, and then you need to have a mix of species within that. And so you can see sort of the third column over, the target seeding rate here that we have is 50 seeds per square foot. And so if you could imagine just a square foot in front of you, that's kind of like what we're going for. And we know a lot of those seeds won't make it. We don't necessarily want 50 all of the same plant. We want a diversity. And so you think about, okay, if I were to be looking at a square foot of meadow, what species would I see in that area? How many would there be, et cetera? And you can kind of start thinking about the percentage of different plants that you'd want in that. And I think roughly when we do seed mixes, we try to aim for 50% grass, 50% wildflowers or forbs. So this Lomatium uticale is kind of an interesting one. This is a forb. It's in the carrot family. It's got kind of a large, heavy seed. And so you can see in the seeds per pound column, you need to factor the size and the weight of the seed in, because if you're doing everything by weight, the really heavy seeds are going to sort of behave differently in the mix than something that's literally dust. We have some native seeds that are so tiny, they don't even look like seeds. But yeah, we help with a lot of this process and troubleshooting, and we also have a pollinator mix that we make every year through the Rogue Native Plant Partnership that people can buy by the pound. That's a good start, but if you really want to pick species in particular and do a more detailed version, you can always go species by species. And then we have a really nice blog that Tuula wrote that goes into even more of these details of how to develop your own seed mix if that's something that you want to get into. And yeah, roguenativeplants.org. We just switched to a new web hosting platform. There's a few missing, or I guess dead links that I still need to fix. So patience, a lot of those will get fixed, but we were ready to go to a more functional platform. So it's working better now, but yeah, we've got to fix some things. Okay, we're back to you.
All right. So this section, we'll just talk a little bit about how to establish a plant community. So looking at it big picture. So the first strategy I want to hit on is having a variety of bloom times in your mix. So you want to think about when you're thinking about your 50% forbs, wildflowers are the plants that provide the pollen resources and the nectar resources to pollinators. So we think about them needing a full menu of options throughout the growing season, and they emerge kind of around this time of year. Some things are flowering, and then you want to make sure that you have something flowering throughout the year, not only for the pollinators, but also for you to enjoy your meadow. So early season species like this plectritis, sea blush, all the way through, the midsummer, the milkweeds, lomatium, like Kathryn was just talking about, camas, and fall great bloomers are tarweed, madia, the Wahithia, some more sunflower family species tend to go off in the fall. There's milkweed, such a beautiful flower. And of course, the essential plant for the monarch butterfly that we all love. And the late season asters. And another strategy is to have multiple layers. So I know we're here talking about meadows, and maybe that's all you have space for, but really, if you can, try to incorporate some other plant types like shrubs and trees. Here's Buddy the dog out in a white oak meadow, and oaks just have a myriad of wildlife value for all kinds of animals, birds, and insects. And of course, they're beautiful too. Very slow growing, so don't plant an oak in your yard, expect to have shade from it in your lifetime, but there are other native tree species that are faster growing and can provide a lot of wildlife habitat benefits as well. And then of course, if you already have native trees in your landscape, do everything you can to keep them. Some shrubs on here as well. So there's the black hawthorn, beautiful white flower, and then edible berries for birds, not so much for humans. Red flowering currant, that's also an edible berry that you could eat if you wanted to, if you could beat the birds to it. But just a beautiful shrub, and pink flowers that come out early in the spring. Really important for hummingbirds too. And then don't forget about those grasses. Grasses are beautiful in their own way. They may be a acquired taste, but especially in drier lawns, and if you don't want to think about watering, definitely invest the time to grow some bunch grasses. Maybe start them from plugs or seedlings so that they get established a little bit sooner, but they can just provide beauty year round, and fire resistance, and super important for pollinators too. And we always think about pollinators as needing the floral resources, but they also do need grasses for habitat, for nesting, and they need the empty spaces that inherently come between. If you look in this picture, you can kind of see some bare ground in between the plants, and that's intentional from the perspective of the plants. Not that I want to personify them, but they do create empty space in between themselves, and that allows for some of our ground nesting bees, which actually most bees in this region are ground nesting. So it's a fact I learned recently. There's a beautiful native grass, Romer's fescue, has needle thin leaves and stays green all year round pretty much. Gorgeous prairie June grass, that's a great one for moisture sites. And then the final tip here is to have both annuals and perennials in your mix. So Calencia is an awesome annual. It's really robust and can grow really big if you have a fertile site, and gives off a lot of seeds to reseed itself year after year. And then perennials, of course, are awesome for being long-lived and putting out a lot of flowers a little bit longer in the season. That's wine Clarkia. That's
my yard.
Yeah, that's Kathryn's garden. That's a great one to establish early on. It seems like in the succession of species that Clarkia seems to take hold quickly. And then I want to talk briefly about seeds versus plugs, which is the object you see in the center of your screen here. That's a soil plug that was grown in a long, skinny container. And those are often used in habitat restoration projects because they're efficient, they're easy to plant. They allow the native plant to grow a nice big root system before it gets transplanted.
Well, just look at the size of those little baby leaves and then those big roots, like, you know, I mean, you got to think about the strategy there of native plants. Yeah, they get it done underground is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So pros and cons there. So we always recommend seed first. It's just the least expensive way to go. It gives you way more diversity, more options for species. When you think about what's available in the nurseries locally, I think the last time I checked, there were maybe 70 species available local nurseries, but those included trees and shrubs. And there's hundreds of native wildflower grass species here in the region. So diversity is good. And if you have a challenging site and things aren't germinating, you know, it might just be that you haven't tried the right plants yet. So trying a variety of seeds is a great way to get to a native ecosystem over time. Conversely, plugs and containerized plants have that nice big root system from the get-go, as you can see. So they're ready to start growing and flowering the minute you get them in the ground. And seeds can take a lot longer to establish, and they're more vulnerable to some of the dangers out there for a tiny plant, such as birds, slugs, drought, all the things that can kill your precious little seedlings. Gardening is ruthless, man. So we recommend both. Right now I've got an area that I've seeded, and I see some things coming up with native plants, and I also see that pesky Bermuda grass coming up because maybe I didn't do enough site prep, or maybe it's just impossible to get rid of, but probably going out there, I'll be digging up those Bermuda grass rhizomes and destroying my happy new seedlings, but I can rest assured knowing that I can hit up the native plant sale this fall and get some container plants to stick in the ground and have some little larger plants that have a head start next year. Anything else we should say about strategies?
No, I think that, yeah, I think you need to use it all. And the thing about doing restoration is just being oddly persistent beyond when you think you should maybe have given up. That's at least what I do.
Oddly persistent. Like
Oddly
that. We should
persistent.
get that on a slide. We need to be oddly persistent with the slideshow here.
Okay, now drum roll, please. Time to talk about weeds.
Wait. Do you want to do this now, or do you want to save it for the Q&A?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Are we running low on time?
We are at 6:50.
I don't know. Let's
go for it. I think we've got time.
Let's go through it. I'll maybe breeze through these a little bit quickly, and then if we want to return to some of these slides, these are usually the questions we get are about these species. So a lot of you are probably familiar with this lovely plant. This is yellow star thistle. It's an annual. It is a real stinker because it germinates constantly. Anytime there's moisture, it can germinate. And it grows a really deep, fast taproot. I don't know if anyone's had the joy of pulling out a young star thistle, but that root can be, you know, like long. And that's actually why it's really effective at competing with bunch grasses and invading those systems, is because it can grow its taproot so fast that it actually gets down to the water level, you know, lower in the soil profile than the bunch grasses are able to grow as they grow a little bit more slowly. And then, of course, as most of you know, if you mow them, they just make more flowers lower down that you can't get to. So they compete for water. They make monocultures, and that's just a fancy word for all of one plant and nothing else. It doesn't allow bunch grasses to establish. A lot of times if those bunch grasses are already present, they can persist relatively well, but they can't establish new baby plants because those young sort of slow growing bunch grasses just can't get the water resources. And, you know, yellow star thistle does supply some pollinator habitat, but it's not really good for much else, and that's sort of short-lived anyways, and we can do a lot of different plants that would do that same thing. So how do you get rid of it? Actually, the Oregon State Extension has a bunch of different documents about this, and there's new research and new things coming out all the time. But I think a good rule of thumb is to just don't let it go to seed. It's an annual. Keep those seeds from making new babies for as long as you can. We've found that this plant, the seeds only live for about 3 or 4 years. And so if you can effectively keep it from seeding for that long of time, then they don't come back. You can mow tall plants and then do that twice, but again, you're going to get those flowers down at the base. But if you do it late enough, you're sort of making that plant use as much energy as possible to produce flowers, whacking it down, and then it just has less energy to produce more flowers. You can pull and burn and try to do that 3 years in a row, like I said, to keep those seeds from coming down again. And then if you can burn during the last year, that sort of helps remove the thatch and really sets the stage for some native seeding. Another one, another fun one. Oh, why are they all pokey? Why are the weeds pokey? So another one that's a stinker would be the Himalayan blackberries. These we see a lot more in riparian areas with moisture soils. They're perennial. They make really hefty underground roots that store a lot of sugars and energy. And they can spread by seed, but mostly we see them spreading vegetatively. And so like the canes will hit the ground, and then wherever they hit, they make more roots, and it's real fun. So these plants obviously dominate riparian understories. You can't really have other trees germinating underneath a thicket of blackberries. If you have one plant, you don't have very much biological diversity. And really the only good thing that they have is tasty berries. But again, there's a lot of native plants that do that as well. So I think it's worth trying to battle with this one. Strategies for removal. So it's not an annual. So what you're trying to do instead of letting it not go to seed is just make it tired. And so you want to exhaust sugar stores by letting it grow and then cutting it back and doing that for years and years and not letting it get sunlight, which is where it gets energy. You can cut it to the ground and sheet mulch. Sometimes the most effective strategy, the only thing that's feasible, especially on large areas, is to spray it for a few years if you can tolerate herbicide, if that's something that's in your management toolbox, and that can allow you the space to then fill that ground with other species, and then the blackberry is less likely to come back. Okay, so another sort of big one in this area is exotic pasture grasses. We do have annual grasses that are also a problem, but I'm focusing on the perennial ones. These are the ones that are brought in for, forage reasons. A lot of times it needs to be like an irrigated meadow or something. These are like lower elevation is where you tend to find these pasture grasses. If you've ever dug them up, you'll see that they have those white rhizomatous roots, and that's a big reason why they're able to spread. And then if there's light disturbance, like grazing or light mowing, they actually really like it, or even light tillage that just breaks up their rhizomes more, and so they can actually multiply more quickly. So again, we're seeing a theme. These plants are a problem, not because they're just not native, but because they actually are bullies and they like take up space that otherwise a bunch of different native species could occupy. And so it's that sort of hostile takeover and having only one thing left over. It also sort of alters the structure of the whole ecosystem down to which insects are there, which birds are there, even sometimes the soils. And it just makes everything really simple, which is not what is resilient to climate change. It's not what is helpful for resilient sort of plant communities and a bunch of different insects and supporting really life in general. So removing these grasses, they're really tough. I'm not going to say that's not hard. This is, if you have a lot of these rhizomatous grasses, this is one where you might want to really consider the herbicide route, at least to get you on a better trajectory, and then use those other approaches. Sometimes tillage can work, but again, if you have these rhizomes under the ground and you're cutting them up into smaller pieces, they're just going to make more. And then smothering, if you can use those tarps and don't want to use the herbicide like we showed in the previous ones, that can be really, really effective, but you have to live with an ugly black tarp on your land for like a year. So none of them are great options, but you really can't, you need to, yeah, really kill them dead. Because they come back so easily. Okay, now we're gonna get into a little bit talking about resources. So we kind of did a brain dump on all the things you can consider and how you want to approach your projects. And then here's the government. We're here to help. Well, not just the government. There's other people here to help. And so Tuula's going to talk about some of those folks and how to get resources and support. And yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I think we have about 10 minutes to get through these, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I see them all coming up in the chat, and I'm excited to get to those. But if you come up with questions later or you need help, here's a few folks who are there for you. So talking about the Jackson County Soil and Water Conservation District up on the top here. They're an awesome group of folks who work with them quite a bit, and they have money for doing this kind of work, especially if you have livestock or water flowing through your property. The whole thing is keeping pollutants out of waterways. So that can include creating meadows, that can include creating pollinator habitat. So reach out to them. They're really friendly folks. Jackson County Soil and Water Conservation District. The Rogue River Watershed Council is another great group. They do a ton of restoration work in our region, and they're really focused on Bear Creek, but all of the tributaries of the Rogue. And if you don't live in the Rogue, there's probably a soil water conservation district where you live, and there's probably a watershed council. And they often have funding for landowners. So just not being able to afford this kind of work is not a barrier, or shouldn't be. And there's, at least in our area, more and more folks who have come out of sort of working for these larger agencies and have their own consulting businesses and can come to your land and talk you through all the things, all the plants, and all the strategies that you might use and help you make a plan. So I'd really recommend that.
And I guess just a terminology thing, riparian just means kind of like a river or a stream side. So the area immediately adjacent to some kind of body of water. But usually in our area, streams, we don't have a lot of lakes.
Thank you. Yeah. And if you have forest or woodland on your property, a lot of folks know about Lomacatsi Restoration Project. They're amazing, and they do a lot of work in our forests, doing thinning, fuels reduction. And I think they also work some occasionally in riparian areas as well. Rogue Valley Prescribed Burn Association is new to our region. I don't have a logo for them yet, but they've been around a couple of years now, and they've been doing a lot of work with individual landowners to do controlled burns in a very careful and legal way. And you can go out and volunteer with them and learn more about using fire on the landscape. Very exciting. Jackson-Josephine County Small Woodlands Association is another resource to give you advice or ideas for managing or restoring woodlands, forests. The Natural Resources Conservation Service is also becoming increasingly active in our area. I need a logo for them too. They're amazing folks who also have funding for landowners to do restoration work, especially if you have retired agricultural fields or pastures. And be a land steward. I went through the OSU Land Extension Land Steward training back in 2019, and it was awesome. That's how I met Kathryn, and just learned a lot about all the different ways to steward land. So I really recommend that if you want to go beyond gardening and into more of the bigger picture stuff. And then the Understory Initiative, so that's the organization that Kathryn and I work with, has a number of programs that may be of interest to you. So I just wanted to call those out really quick. So if you are in need of volunteer hours, we have a Rare Plant Monitoring Network. We have Vesper Meadow Education Program. I don't know how what the Master Gardener requirements are for the type of volunteer work you do, but if you need something involving plants, those are great ones. The Understory Initiative program for private lands is one that we usually talk about when we give this lecture, but unfortunately we're at capacity. We've had so many people who are interested in creating pollinator habitat on their land and getting free seed through that program, which is funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that we just can't take anybody else this year. So check back in with us next year if that's of interest to you. And then the Rogue Native Plant Partnership, I'm going to take a couple more slides to describe here. So this is our beautiful new website. This is our mission to facilitate diverse ecosystems in tandem with more robust native plant materials economy in the Rogue Basin. And as Kathryn mentioned earlier, we do a lot of work to ensure that there are diverse native plant materials available, including seeds, and that those are sourced locally. So a big issue in our region is that we don't have a lot of major seed producers that are growing pounds and pounds of seeds for gardeners and for restorationists. So a lot of the seed is coming from northern areas, the Willamette Valley, and that's not the kind of adaptation that we need in this climate. We need plants that are adapted to hotter and drier conditions. So try and buy your seeds regionally. There's a number of folks who offer native seeds and plants here, and just ask, what their seed sources are and if it's going to be a good match for your particular garden. The Rogue Native Plant Partnership Resources Library. Here's the link. You can scan it and go there with your phone. It's a great one for all of these resources that I was just mentioning, and I'm going to highlight a couple here. So the on the left here is just an example of, I searched for soil in the resources library and came up with a blog post that we wrote about how to use the USDA web soil survey, and then a link to the web soil survey itself. So if you haven't researched your soil type in your garden, that's a great way to do it. And then on the right here, there's a category for container production. So if you're interested in not just growing a meadow, but also maybe growing some plugs for other folks to be able to put native plants in their gardens, there's some resources for that.
And these are the resources that we find that we want to share with people over and over again. And so it became just easier to have them listed. I mean, obviously anyone can do a Google search, but these are ones that are specific to Southwest Oregon that we think are actually really helpful, that we use to do our work. So, it's not like a huge list, it's not super overwhelming, but they're really high quality.
Curated. A couple other resources that we have up there. We try to update this every year. So where to go to buy native plants. Master Gardener Native Plant Sale is on there, Jackson County, and they're awesome at making a lot of native plants available. This is another really great resource that talks about white oak habitat, which is oak savanna, which is meadow. So check that out. And then I wanted to briefly tell you about our seed sale. So every fall we have an online sale, and all native species to Southwest Oregon A lot of them are wild collected, and more are from local wild collection sources, but have been grown on a farm. So there's more seed and it's a more affordable price. And we try to include as much information about each seed lot that we can, so that you can make a really informed choice for the ecology of your project. And if you are doing a larger area and you want more than a pound of seed, we just ask that you provide us with a restoration plan, and there's blog posts and resources to tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and that's just to ensure that it's very precious seed that's in high demand, low supply. And so we want anyone who uses the seed to just have a good plan. And if not, we can sort of help improve it before, yeah, things don't work.
And then finally, I just wanted to tell you about our volunteer opportunities. So we go out pretty much every week all summer long and collect native seeds. We'll show you how to do it. And we also have opportunities for folks to help us with the seed cleaning once we get back to the shop. So it's a little bit easier and less physically intensive than going out and wild collecting seed. But whatever kind of activity you're into, we probably have a volunteer opportunity for it. And also we do a couple restoration projects every year where we go out and plant things at spots like Table Rocks or private lands where people are doing land restoration. Yeah, here's a code for our website again. We do have an email list. We send an email out once a month-ish with what's going on in the native plant world. Love this pic of just a bunch of folks hanging out together, cleaning native seed using screens.
Yeah, it was a great day.
Yeah, that was a great day. And monarch chrysalis we saw in the field where we harvest milkweed pods every year, and caterpillar seen in the same location. And there's the monarch itself. So there's our information if you'd like to get in touch with us after this presentation.
We're going to do questions on this slide, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're going to bring them up here.
Yeah,
Cool.
I've got a handful of questions that people have been putting into the
Awesome.
chat throughout the presentation.
Thank you.
Cool. You don't have to look
So,
into the screen.
starting us off, trying to see things that we didn't really get time to answer too much. So, these meadows, like you had mentioned before, would get a little bit drier in the summer, go a little bit more dormant. What is the fire hazard that a lot of this meadowing would have, and are there recommendations for how far away from a structure they should be?
We are not fire experts. However, I will say that, like I was talking about earlier, native bunch grasses and wildflowers that evolved here are also evolved to have adaptations for fire events happening regularly. And in my experience, especially with native bunch grasses, what I notice is they stay green significantly longer into the fall than all the other non-native grasses. And so, I mean, again, I'm not a fire expert, but I think the green plant would burn less hot than a crispy brown one. I think that's pretty well demonstrated. And so you have lower severity fires that are more controllable. And the plants themselves are going to persist long term, even if they experience fire. So fire is just a fact of where we live. I think that thinking about plants as causing fires or spreading fires to structures is actually a little bit backwards. It's our buildings and roofs and the things we've put on the landscape that are actually really hazardous or are fire prone, and those structures bring fire, spread fire to plants and trees that have evolved here to coexist with fire. So I don't mean to get a little bit deep there, but Chris Adlam does a really good talk about thinking about sort of changing the paradigm about how you think about that. But really it's, it's the shingles on our roof and it's the things that the lumber we use to build our houses that I would say is more not the problem, but we need to be thoughtful and maybe not blame the plants because they didn't.
Okay, next question. We have someone with kind of a savanna site, oak and madrone. They've tried to spread seeds and sow from seed, and nothing will germinate and pop up. Are there some recommendations for restoration on that front?
When are you seeding?
That is
That's
a
what
good
we can answer
question. Don't know what time of year they're seeding.
Yeah, respond to that in the chat maybe, but yeah, timing is really important. In the fall, like September, October is typically when we put down native seed. And so the reason behind that is that's right when the wet season is starting. Like we talked about earlier, a lot of natives, their strategy is to start growing really slowly in the middle of winter, and grow really slowly while there's moisture, and they can put in tap roots and not necessarily grow a lot of above ground plant material, so you wouldn't even really know they're there. And then when spring hits and it warms up, boom, they can hit the ground running. They can make their flowers, they do everything, and then they close up shop when it gets really hot and dry. So you really got to hit that timeline. And then, sometimes freaky things will happen. I've always struggled with, there's like a couple weeks in February or March that are like really weirdly dry and warm. And so if you think about all these little baby plants germinating in February and then a dry spell hits, like that would really knock them out. And so sometimes supplemental irrigation during that, if there is a dry patch like that, to just get them through so that they can actually establish their roots and not be so wimpy and tiny. It's just they're really, really fragile at that, seedling stage. And so being cognizant of that. And then making sure you're doing really effective weed management. If you are not managing, if you have like thatchy grass, like forget about it. Like that seed isn't gonna come up. So yeah, you really have to do the weed management. Like
Yeah,
it's your
it seems that they have been spreading their seed in the falls, and they have mentioned it's on bare ground. So maybe there's something going on there with soil conditions or something that
yeah,
was there in the past. Hard to.
if the soil is remaining bare and like not even the invasive plants are getting in there, you might want to do a soil test or, have some other things to look at. Or you could have just a really unique site that's like really rocky or has, some kind of soil dynamic that's really particular. Thankfully, native plants can really be adapted to freaky situations, really harsh situations. And so there might just be a different plant community altogether, like a different set of plants that you need to focus on.
Mhm. Thank you. And the next question I have, so some of the cons of tilling might be disrupting that ecosystem that's there in the soil. When would you kind of want to assess when should you till versus not till and balance those advantages and disadvantages?
Can I take that one?
I would say it depends on the plants that you're trying to eliminate by tilling. And so if you have a lot of weed seeds from grass, for example, you probably do want to till. It does seem to build up in the seed bank for a long period of time. And that can also help with the rhizomes that tend to accumulate. If you're able to get those to the surface, allow them to germinate and kill them again, that could be helpful. But I don't think tilling is required. I think that you can get away with tarping if you're willing to be a little bit more patient and do it over and over again. So in my situation here in the agate desert, Central Point, it's really, really clayey soil, and there would be few times of year when it would be moist enough, but not too moist to get in there until. So I've just opted to keep tarping, and it's gonna take a while, I think, but it's also giving me a chance to get to know the rest of the landscape a little bit better. So there's just different approaches to restoration, and there's no one answer, as we say. So
And
do what
typically
works for you.
the tillage is kind of a one-time deal at the beginning. With agriculture, there's tilling every year, and there's all this evidence that that is really bad for, the microbes in the soil and soil health in general. Especially if you're working in a place where the soil is already highly modified, there's already a lot of problems. Sometimes you got to be a little bit more aggressive to get things returned to something that will grow plants. But yeah, it's really just, we do it like once and then we don't do it every year by any means.
Great, thank you. And following that up, a couple people had mentioned their plants getting outcompeted by invasive grasses and wanting to know if there's some natives that are going to be really good competitors against some of those invasives.
Oh yes, so think about the name invasive. So by definition, an invasive plant is one that takes over from an existing native plant. So it's kind of like an oxymoron to say that there's natives that will outcompete an invasive, if that makes sense. We need to do our best to create an absence of those invasive species first. If you don't focus on that, you're just going to end up right where you started, unfortunately. I think there's a little bit of wiggle room around that. Sometimes there are certain non-native species that can coexist pretty well with natives if they don't outcompete them. But if you have legitimately like pasture grass, invasive, species, like they will eventually outcompete the natives unless you initiate disturbance or knock them back in a really thoughtful way, sometimes repeatedly, sometimes you can do it once and they don't come back, but it's no joke. I mean, the invasives are no joke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely something we all love to deal with in our yards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In terms of fast growing annuals, though, I think there are some that do stand a chance if you are just in a situation where you can't get rid of all of the pasture grasses and you want to create a novel plant community where there's both, native forbs and invasive pasture grasses. You can do that. There's some like the Clarkia, the
Amsynchia is really good.
is
Yeah.
pretty aggressive. Yarrow is really great.
Oregon
so-
Sunshine.
Yeah, Oregon Sunshine, Areophyllum. Those are species that we would recommend in that situation. But again, you're always going to have the pasture grass there, and you're always going to probably need to do some hand weeding to keep it at bay. So it's just a different approach.
Yeah, you could certainly get natives mixed in, but if you were to just walk away for 5 years, when you came back, it would mostly just be the pasture grass again. So yeah, if you're looking for a no maintenance situation, you really gotta change your expectations and then deal with the weeds. But yeah, if you're willing to maintain it over time, knock them back good at the beginning, and then yeah, use some more fast growing, more aggressive early cereal native species.
Thank you. And do you have some good recommendations on references for plant lists that are native to Oregon, specifically Southern Oregon?
Yeah, so that reference that appeared in the image on the previous slide is a really great one, that native pollinator plants for Southern Oregon.
Oh yeah.
So that's on our website. There are also a couple other resources in there. The Oak Savannah one, I believe, has a plant list.
We also, the Rogue Native Plant Partnership, we have a priority species list that's, more focused on like what we think would be the most important to have available at a larger scale in this region for restoration. And then there's also the Oregon Flora Project, which has all of the native species, and you can look at maps. You can, you can also, they have a key that they're finishing up, so you can really figure out what you have. I also, iNaturalist is a really good resource for being able to determine what's native and what's not. But if it's native and it's still left on your property, it's probably meant to be there because it's a fighter. So keep those, and then try to augment with whatever you can get that sort of is from that same plant community type.
Awesome, great. And in similar vein to Oregon Flora, Cowscape is good
Cowscape's
for
really good, yeah.
being very more southern parts of Oregon. I've used that before.
Yeah, and they have recommendations on like really specific, like how much sun and what kind of watering, and they're really helpful for gardeners, especially. I really like that site. Oregon Flora is a little bit more for ecologists and doing mapping and plant population tracking. But yeah, the other one that you mentioned is really, really good.
Yeah, so another question. So in the case where herbicides are sprayed to remove weeds and whatnot, is there ways to mitigate those chemicals, and how long should you expect that land to be kind of contaminated with that herbicide? Is that going to be a problem when you're replanting?
Yeah, so it depends. There we go again. There's a lot of different types of herbicides. They are usually specially made for certain functions. So a lot of herbicides are made only to kill grasses. And I'm not an expert on like exactly the biological reason why they focus on monocots or grasses and not dicots, but they have figured out how to have those chemicals focus in on a certain trait of those types of plants. Likely, you can also get one that's only for forbs that won't hurt grasses, but will hurt forbs. And then there's even more specificity, like some of them only will hurt germinating seeds. So if you have really bad invasive annuals, for example, if you just prevent those seeds from germinating, it won't hurt sort of the existing growing plants. It's only, it only really targets at that life stage of seed germination. I will say, like, it's tricky because a lot of the people who do research on the effects of herbicides are herbicide producers. So there's, a conflict of interest there. So you've got to be careful about what your source is. And a lot of it's for agricultural purposes and not necessarily for native species. And so, it'll say things for corn or wheat, but it won't necessarily say things for native species. And so it is a growing part of the field. It's, to be able to manage that well. I know it just depends on what chemical we're talking about, to know how long it lives in the soil, which types of tissues it goes in or doesn't go in, how it functions. And so I'd really recommend, reaching out to somebody who specializes in those if you know what chemical was used. And, there's also a difference between eating what is on that site for consumption or just planting in it. Again, if it's the only herbicide that's really going to affect germinating seeds is a pre-emergent, but all the other ones that are going to hurt the leaf tissues, that's not necessarily going to stop a seed from germinating because those tend to like go away within a few days.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll wrap up with one last question, and then I'll highlight some of our upcoming classes and go through those action items that I had mentioned at the beginning of class. So last question, do you have any suggestions about redisturbing areas that have been seeded with native plants?
Well, don't do it if you don't have to. But yeah, I mean, that comes up. So like, let's say you've got a spot that has some good native functioning plants, but there's some weeds to deal with. Yeah, it's really hard. I think you have to look at every single plant, what its history is, or like what its timeline is. So in some cases, like if you have a grass that early in the spring puts out seeds that you want to knock that back, maybe you could do a low mowing and the natives haven't even popped up yet. And so you could get those seed heads, or even before the seed heads, or knock those grasses back to sort of shift the trajectory. And also it just takes being able to tell the difference between a native plant and a non-native plant at all stages. So what does a native seedling look like? What does the full plant look like? What does it look like when it's gone to seed? If you know those things, I think that it's hard and it's not efficient, and it sometimes just takes literally, getting down on your hands and knees and trying to tell the difference over and over again. Even on large scale restoration sites, like there's people their entire job is to go out and pull weeds. So yeah, I mean, you need every single approach, big and small and tedious and not.
Great, thank you both so much for presenting tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was really fun.
Stop the share here.
Okay, and then I'll take over and share and wrap up. So thank you everyone for being here. So some of our action items that we can do in addition to putting some more natives into our lawns. iNaturalist is a app on phone and on the computer, and they are having a good April for Native Plant Appreciation Month. I think some of them are called bio blitzes, where people post photos and descriptions of where they saw some native plants. And this really helps us get a good category of what is going to be in our areas in April. And if you're able to go back and see those plants after they've flowered, set seed, seeing how they're a little bit different, that information is going to be even more helpful to see what these plants are like and some of that data for them later on in the year. iNaturalist is a community science organization where you post photos of plants and animals, and anyone around the world can access that data and say, okay, I can get these numbers in this area of Oregon about what's going on at that moment in time. And then if you're willing to do some above and beyond, you can get volunteering with ecological nonprofits and do some of that hands-on work. So on our QR code on the right-hand side, you can hover your phone camera over that, and that link will take you to recordings of tonight's presentation, these action list recordings for other presentations in the Sustainable Living series. And I will also be sending out an email with these links as well for anyone not able to see or unable to get their QR code working tonight. So I am the Master Gardener Coordinator, and we do a lot of educational classes, including the Sustainable Living series with the land stewards and Jackson Soil and Water Conservation. We do have upcoming classes. Always check them out. Some are more lectures like this. Some are more hands-on. We had a hands-on rose pruning class and grapevine pruning class earlier in the year. Those are really fantastic to get some hands in the, I almost said trees, shrubs and vines for those two. And then the next upcoming Sustainable Living series classes will be community composting on April 3rd in person at the Southern Oregon Research and Extension Center. It's going to be a great conversation from some of our local composters and how we can kind of do that even if we don't have property to compost for ourselves. And then on April 9th on Zoom again, will be landscaping for water conservation with Cora from the Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. So keep those upcoming classes in mind. And thank you for coming to our presentation tonight. And I hope you enjoyed it and learned some things.